Sigman.
Dr. Sigman, how are you employed, sir?
I am a faculty member at the University of Central Florida.
What is your highest level of formal education, sir?
I have a PhD in chemistry.
You currently, in addition to being affiliated with the University of Central Florida, are you affiliated with any other organizations?
Yes, sir. I have a joint appointment with the National Center for Forensic Science, which is part of the University of Central Florida.
Can you tell us briefly your history of employment?
Following the postdoctoral appointments, I worked for 1 year as a research scientist at Dow Chemical in Midland, Michigan. Then I moved to Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where I was a staff scientist from 1990 until 2002. After leaving Oak Ridge in 2002, I went to work at the University of Central Florida, where I am now.
Did you have acquaintance by chance with Dr. Arpad Voss while you were at Oak Ridge?
Yes, I've known Dr. Voss during the time that I was at Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
Sir, have you, well, first of all, would you tell me what is a peer-reviewed article?
When we perform research in the sciences, we want to publish that work. We write a manuscript detailing the results of the work. We send it to a journal. The journal will send it out to the article out to our peers who are doing similar research in various institutions, academic, government, people generally who are doing very highly related work. They review the article, send back their reviews to the editor, and the editor makes a decision on whether to publish the article or not. You do not know who the reviewers are.
How many peer-reviewed articles have you had credit for or contributing to, Doctor?
I believe about 64. I list in my CV 74 peer-reviewed publications, book chapters, and proceedings from meetings.
In addition to all of these peer-reviewed articles, have you made presentations, lectures to professional groups regarding your work?
Yes, sir. Over the time since I received my PhD, I've made probably 140, I can't remember the exact number, that was supposedly belonged to Miss Anthony. I agreed to speak with Mr. Stryker. He phoned me and told me that they had been in contact with Dr. Voss. They wanted to take samples of air from the trunk of the car, but Dr. Voss was not available to take those samples. Apparently, Dr. Voss gave them my name as someone who would be able to take those samples and who was currently resident in the Orlando area. Pump to pull the air into the bag. We did not have a pump, so we used a gas-tight syringe with a metal needle attached to the end of the syringe. When I arrived at the Orange County garage, the trunk on the car was closed. We opened the trunk just maybe an inch, just enough to get the needle from the syringe into the trunk of the car. We extracted the air through the needle and then placed it into the Tedlar bag.
And how many samples of air did you draw for the directions of Dr. Voss?
We took the two samples, one approximately 1 liter into the larger of the two Tedlar bags, and the second sample approximately 300 milliliters into the second smaller Tedlar bag.
What, if anything, did you do with those air samples in the Tedlar bags?
We left both samples in the custody of the Orange County Sheriff's Department. The larger bag they were to send to Dr. Voss, and the smaller bag they brought to the University of Central Florida, to the National Center for Forensic Science on the following morning, July 22nd, for us to perform preliminary sampling on that bag.
What tests, if any, did you run on these samples, sir?
The first test that we ran, we used a gas-tight syringe to pull 250 microliters of air from the bag, and we injected it directly into a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer to analyze the air.
Doctor, the jury has heard this gas chromatograph mass spectrometer enough to probably say it in their sleep. What is it?
A gas chromatograph is an instrument which is like an oven. It has an oven component. It has within this oven component a very long glass capillary. The capillary in the oven that we used was approximately 25 to 30 meters in length. The interior diameter of that that capillary is approximately 0.25 millimeters, and it has a very thin coating on the wall, in our case about 0.25 microns. The sample is...
You're losing. What's a micron, and how thick or how thin is that? Tell us what it is.
A micron is a 1/1,000,000th of a meter, so a 25 micron thick film is 25 millionths of a meter in thickness. The sample is inserted into the instrument, generally by some sort of a syringe. It is passed through this column. The different components in the mixture interact differently with the walls of the capillary, and they separate, the components of the mixture will separate out into bands. After they have gone through this column, they come out into the mass spectrometer, which is the detector for this instrument. When they enter the mass spectrometer, they enter what is called a source. There are electrons in the source that are being accelerated, in our case, 70 electron volts. Those electrons pass very close to the molecules or interact with them and actually take an electron essentially from the molecules that have come off the column, creating a positive charge on those molecules. Those molecules are then directed through a mass analyzer, which basically tells us the ratio of the mass of the molecule to the charge of the molecule. The molecules have a weight, and when they are ionized in the source, sometimes they stay in one piece, sometimes they break into multiple pieces, and based on the pieces that they break into and the mass to charge ratio of those pieces, we then can identify what the analyte or what the compounds were that came off the column.
And is the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer universally accepted as the method of doing chemical testing?
It is a widely used and well-characterized method of doing chemical analysis, especially the electron ionization methodology that we use in the source is very stable and has been used many, many times.
In this particular case, sir, you were about to tell us what I needed in education, what you did.
Yes, we analyzed the 250 microliter sample of air that we pulled in the syringe, and the results that we obtained from the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer showed us that there were trace amounts of volatile organic components in the sample. But the signal was not strong. The sample was not concentrated enough for us to achieve what we consider to be a very usable or a good signal.
Now, you've tested, if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the bags of the air samples, the other one went to Dr. Voss.
We left the other bag with Orange County. I'm not sure if it was sent to Dr. Voss.
Fair enough. And your test resulted in what, sir?
Can you be more specific?
The test that you did, what were the results? What did you find?
For the test of the 250 microliter air sample, we saw organic components very weakly in the sample. They were components that were comparable to the sorts of materials that you would find, for example, in gasoline or some other petroleum product. They were hydrocarbons.
gasoline, ordinary gasoline.
Yes.
And did you find anything else other than gasoline in these air samples, sir?
In the first sample that I've just discussed, the 250 microliters, the sample was too weak. So we took a second sample from the bag, and we took that sample using a different methodology which would concentrate the sample. That methodology for sampling the bag the second time is what is called a solid phase micro-extraction fiber, or a SPME. And what that amounts to is a very thin glass fiber which has a 65 micron, or 65 millionths of a meter, thick polymer coating on the glass. That fiber is contained within a metal needle. You place the metal needle into the sample, in this case into the bag. You then extend the glass fiber and let it sit for a period of time, during which organics that are in the vapor phase in the bag will adsorb onto that polymer and be concentrated. You then retract the glass fiber into the metal needle, retract the metal needle from the bag, go to the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, insert the needle and extend the fiber, and in the gas chromatograph, the very part where you insert the samples is called an injection port. It is hot, 250 degrees centigrade in our case, and the organic analytes that are adsorbed on that polymer come off and proceed through the gas chromatograph and into the mass spectrometer for analysis.
What were the components that you were able to extract through all this testing?
The second sample from the 300 milliliter air sample was very similar to the first sample, except it was much more concentrated. We had a better signal, and we determined from that if we wanted a really good air sample or a better air sample from the trunk of the car, then the way to do it would be with the solid phase micro-extraction fiber. The results of that test were, again, consistent with the presence of gasoline.
Were you able to do a quantitative analysis of any of the compounds found in that sampling?
No, we did not do any quantitative analyses.
What were the compounds that you actually were able to identify through this process, sir?
In the second sample that we pulled from the Tedlar bag using the solid phase micro-extraction, we identified several components, toluene, some ethylbenzene. We didn't completely analyze everything in the bag because we knew that we could get a better sample, but those are components that you typically find in gasoline.
Did you, in your testing, determine that there was some amounts of tetrachloroethene?
May I access my...
You did a report in this case?
Yes.
And you made, sir, if I correctly, that was dated July the 30th of 2008, that you sent to the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, sir.
Do you need to review that to refresh your recollection?
I just want to access it to, yes.
You may do so, sir.
I do not believe in sample 2, as I recall, that we identified tetrachloroethylene. We did identify it in some additional samples that we took later.
And what were they?
After doing the samples from the Tedlar bag, after analyzing those, on July 22nd, we returned to the Orange County garage with a solid phase microextraction fiber and also a activated carbon strip. We took one sample from the car using the solid phase microextraction fiber being placed in the trunk for 40 minutes, and the carbon strip was also in the trunk for 40 minutes. We took those back to the National Center for Forensic Science. After taking them out of the trunk, we placed them on ice. We returned to the National Center for Forensic Science and analyzed them immediately following our return. The following day, we returned to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. We collected 4 solid phase microextraction fiber samples. The fibers were left in the trunk for a period of 7.5 hours. We also collected that day 2 activated carbon strip samples, which were also in the trunk for 7.5 hours.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I wanted you to tell us what the analytical result was of those tests.
Yes, sir. We returned with the 7.5 hour samples and analyzed them the same day as well. In those samples, the chromatographic data was better, was stronger response than we saw from the samples from the Tedlar bag. There was a pattern, the primary pattern in the chromatograph was that of gasoline. And in looking more closely at the data, we also determined that there was present in the data, in the sample, chloroform, dimethyl disulfide, and tetrachloroethylene.
And were any of those subjected to or capable of being subjected to a quantitative analysis?
A quantitative analysis was not done. A quantitative analysis could have been done. We did not do one.
So the primary substance was gasoline,
Yes,
and then the other 3 that you told us.
that's correct.
Now, what common sources of tetrachloroethylene are there that you're aware of?
It's my understanding that tetrachloroethylene is primary use is in the dry cleaning industry. Can also be used as a degreaser.
I'm not sure the witnesses testified that was. I'm not sure the witness testified that was found. Tetrachloroethylene, I don't recall him mentioning that as being found. Relevance.
The witness can clarify. Go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you clarify your statement?
Apparently it's confused. I didn't understand. What were the compounds that you found in the car, in the air? You said primary gasoline and others. What were the others?
Right. Three other compounds.
Okay.
Chloroform.
Tell us again.
Chloroform, dimethyl disulfide, and tetrachloroethylene.
Okay.
Thank you. That's my mistake.
And the tetrachloroethylene is what you just said, sir, is used in dry cleaning and spot removers and so forth?
Yes.
All right. And the chloroform is used how?
Chloroform is a solvent that you commonly find in chemical laboratories and has uses also in degreasing applications and that sort of thing. It's also formed in, you find it in natural settings, and it's formed from the reaction of oxidizing agents such as hypochlorite, sodium hypochlorite, or bleach with organic components in the environment.
Clorox.
Yes, sodium hypochlorite.
Just 1 second, Your Honor. Dimethyl disulfide you found,
Yes.
and does it occur naturally in substances that the rest of us might understand?
Yes, dimethyl disulfide is present in onions, it's present in cabbage, It has been reported in soil samples, and it's also been reported in decomposition events as well.
Based on your training, experience, and education, sir, are dimethyl disulfide, tetrachloroethylene, and chloroform sometimes liberated from a decomposition of human remains?
I have not done direct studies on the decomposition of human remains. It is reported in peer-reviewed literature by Dr. Vass and by Dr. Statheropoulos that there are a whole host of compounds that are eliminated or produced during decomposition. Dr. Vass reported in 2008 in the Journal of Forensic Science that tetrachloroethylene, chloroform, and dimethyl disulfide are produced during human decomposition. He listed 30 compounds in his paper, which included those three that he called markers for human decomposition. Dr. Statheropoulos, in a paper from 2005 in the Forensic Science International Journal, reported a list of 86 chemicals that were found evolved from 2 decomposing bodies that had been found in the Mediterranean Sea. Of those 86 compounds that he listed as the most prevalent compounds, 11 were in common with the 30 listed by Dr. Vass. Dr. Statheropoulos did not list chloroform. He did not list carbon tetrachloroethylene. However, his samples were produced from aerobic or decomposition in air. Dr. Vass indicated in his paper that the chloroform and the tetrachloroethylene were likely produced by decomposition under anaerobic conditions without air present. And I find no disagreement between those two necessarily. So based on the literature that I have read from the peer-reviewed literature, I do believe that those compounds can be considered as related to a human decomposition event.
In addition to
Analyzed, and in those samples, the 3 compounds that we just talked about, the chloroform, carbon tetrachloroethylene, and dimethyl disulfide were present, but they were at they gave very low responses in the instrument, although we did not quantify the concentrations. And because there are other sources of them available in the environment, based solely on our data from our test, I could not conclusively determine that the presence of those compounds indicated that there had been human remains in the trunk of the car.
Or were you aware of the bag of garbage that was found in the trunk of the car?
I really have tried not to follow all of the details, but I do understand that there was garbage found in the trunk of the car.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I have no further questions. Well, hang on just a second. I do have one last question to clarify from your report, sir. How many samples did you take? Air samples?
There were a total of 6 air samples, the 2 Tedlar bags, the 40-minute solid phase microextraction fiber. Sample number 4 was a 40-minute carbon strip, an absorptive carbon strip. Sample 5 included 4 solid phase microextraction fibers, 2 of which were retained by Orange County Sheriff's Office, 2 of which we analyzed at the University of Central Florida, and there were 2 carbon strips, 7.5-hour exposures in the trunk of the car.
From all of those samples, was the primary finding that of gasoline?
Gasoline was the principal chromatographic profile principal chromatographic profile resulting from the analysis of those samples could be attributed to gasoline.
And do you know which of those samples or how many of them contain these other substances that we were talking about?
The solid phase microextraction fibers from the 40-minute exposure and the 2 7.5-hour exposures contain the 3 compounds chloroform, tetrachloroethylene, and dimethyl disulfide. We did not see those. I do not recall that we specifically identified those in the samples taken from the Tedlar bag or from the last carbon strip that we analyzed, which we extracted the components off of that carbon strip with carbon disulfide, which is a common methodology followed in fire debris analysis. And in analyzing that sample, we also did not see the 3 compounds chloroform, dimethyl disulfide, or tetrachloroethylene.
Was the gathering of the air with the syringe process as you described for the 2 Tedlar bags done at the same time?
Yes, sir, it was.
Thank you very much.
Cross-examination?
Can we go ahead and take our morning break now?
Yeah,
Thank you.
we'll take a 15-minute recess at this time. Stay recognized, President of the jury.
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense? You may proceed with your cross-examination.
Good morning, Dr. Signer.
Good morning.
The date that you took your air samples, I believe you said was July 21st of 2008. Is that correct?
That is the date that we took the air samples from the trunk to go into the Tedlar bags, yes.
All right. And that was the first sample?
That is correct.
Now, the way you did it, you just sort of cracked open the trunk and stuck some sort of syringe in it and drew out an air sample.
Yes, we opened the trunk maybe 1 inch, maybe a little further, just enough to get a needle. The syringe actually had a long needle, possibly about an 8-inch needle on it, and we put that inside the trunk and pulled the air through that.
So you did not open and inspect the trunk?
No, we did not.
So you were not aware that the trunk liner and the spare tire cover had been removed 4 days before? You didn't know that?
I did not know that.
So your air sample would have been from the trunk 4 days after the tiny amount of air. And then you injected that into a Tedlar bag, or I'm sorry, though that's the one you took back directly to the lab, right? The first sample. I think I've confused you. I'm sorry. The first sample you took, what did you do with it?
Okay, on the 21st, we pulled 2 samples from the car. The first one was approximately 1 liter, and the second one was 300 milliliters, about 1/3 the size of the 1 liter one.
Okay. And those were placed in the Tedlar bag?
That is correct.
All right. And those were then taken to the lab and sampled?
They were held by the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and a deputy, or I believe a crime scene technician, Mike Vincent, brought the 300 mil Tedlar bag sample to University of Central Florida on the morning of the 22nd.
And now Dr. Voss had requested that you use a device called a triple sorbent trap.
Yes.
But you didn't have that equipment.
That is correct.
Now, the advantage of a triple sorbent trap is it allows you to test the chemical components of a much larger volume of air, correct?
That is correct. With the triple sorbent trap, you use a pump and you pull air through a bed of adsorbent, in this case, three adsorbents, Carbotrap C and Carbosiv S3. And each of those sorbents in the bed takes out different analytes. And so if you pull 10 liters of air through that trap, then you get the components that are in 10 liters of air.
And the advantage of that is you can, in effect, test a large volume of air by just pulling the air through the triple sorbent trap, depending on how long you let it run and how the pump is set.
That is correct.
But you did not have that equipment or that capability of doing that.
I did not.
All right. Now, in your analysis, though, even of the air sample itself, you indicated that you found some weak signals for organic compounds, correct?
That is correct.
Then you went to the next level, which was the SPME fibers, the SPME for the court reporter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, those basically, as you described, are fibers that you essentially just expose to the ambient air and allow the chemicals that happen to be in the air to attach to the fiber, correct?
That is correct.
But again, that method, though better than the bag, is still not as a good a testing method as a triple sorbent trap, correct?
It is a different sampling method and will not concentrate as large an amount of analyte. Therefore, you will probably receive a worse signal-to-noise ratio in the instrument response, a lower instrument response from the solid-phase microextraction fibers.
But again, just like with the other method, you're not actually drawing air past the SPME fibers. You're just sort of letting them sit and letting the ambient air absorb into them, sort of.
That is correct.
So that method, though better, still is not as good as triple sorbent trap in finding out what's actually there.
I would consider the triple sorbent trap a better sampling methodology for, especially for components that might be at low concentrations in an air sample.
And would that also be the case for the carbon strips, that this triple sorbent trap is a better method than the carbon strips as well?
That would be correct, yes.
But it would be fair to say that you used the best method that you had available to you in order to try to determine the chemical components of the trunk sample.
That is correct.
Now, your sampling simply tells you what was in the air in the trunk. It doesn't tell you where it came from, correct?
That is correct.
So if there was a particular object in the trunk that you suspected the odor would come from, there are other methods you could use to test those individual items.
If those individual items were isolated, then you could test the air above those items after giving them an appropriate time to equilibrate, and you could test what was coming from those individual items, yes.
Equilibrate means basically you allow the amount of the compounds in the surrounding air to equalize to some extent with the amount that's in the object you're looking at.
Basically, yes, that is correct.
And one of those methods would be to place the item in question in a Tedlar bag and allow it to off-gas into the air for a certain period of time to determine what was in it.
That would be an acceptable approach, yes.
Now, even with the methods that you were able to use, and even with the trunk liner and the spare tire cover gone, you were still able to detect chloroform, correct?
That is correct.
And you were still able to detect the other chemicals that you've referenced, TCE and dimethyl disulfide.
Tetrachloroethylene and dimethyl sulfide, yes. I'm sorry, dimethyl disulfide.
Dimethyl disulfide, I'm sorry, I was scribbling quickly.
That's
And you've indicated that even based on that very limited sampling, that those chemical constituents are consistent with the research that's out there about human decomposition.
Those components are reported in the peer review literature as arising from human decomposition.
But as you said, they can coincidentally come from other separate sources.
That is correct.
Now, you mentioned to counsel that chloroform can come from a reaction between bleach, as an example, and certain organic components.
That is correct.
And that's in some literature studying the effects of finding small amounts of chloroform in people that have swim in pools.
I have seen one report, I believe it was from an Iranian journal, that did indicate that there was chloroform in swimming pool water and in people that had actually been in the pool. Yes.
And in potentially hazardous amounts or just in very, very minor amounts?
As I recall that article, it was in very minor amounts, not hazardous amounts.
Do those articles also reflect that there should be other component chemicals created by this coincidental reaction between chlorine and organic components?
If bromide ions are present, that's Br minus bromide, then it can react with the hypochlorous acid, which is from the Clorox bleach in aqueous solution, to form hypobromous acid. And the hypobromous acid, along with the remaining hypochlorous acid, can lead to not only chloroform, but also chloro compounds, methane containing both bromine and chlorine.
So the reaction, if that were to occur, would create more than just chloroform. It would create other signature chemicals to reflect that that had occurred.
As long as the bromide was there to form the hypobromous acid, yes.
And even in a case of sort of, well, is there any support in the literature or any case reports in the literature of chlorine being caused by a bathing suit being thrown in the back of a trunk?
I'm not aware of any literature discussing that.
Even if you had a coincidental or accidental creation of chloroform through chlorine and these other organic chemicals, would you still expect to find some residual chlorine that had not gone through that reaction and become chloroform?
By chlorine, I assume you're referring to chlorine gas, Cl2, which is the natural form of chlorine?
Yes.
I suspect that particular material would either hydrolyze with water to form hydrochloric acid, which contains chloride ions, or it would dissipate.
Did you find anything in your evaluation of the air sample that would lead you to believe that this chlorine came from some sort of inadvertent reaction between either pool chlorine or chlorine bleach and organic compounds, this kind of accidental thing that counsel was asking about?
There's nothing in our results that indicate the source of the chloroform or the tetrachloroethylene, which are the two analytes that contained chloroform. We simply know they're there. We don't know their source.
Now, when you examined, your background is not in studying human decomposition, correct? Hasn't been your specialty.
That is correct.
When you worked with the trunk and you opened it slightly, did you detect an odor coming from the trunk?
Yes, there was an odor coming from the trunk.
But do you have any background in identifying that odor?
I do not.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Dr. Seaman, the total number of samples you took, is it true that you found these slight traces of chloroform in only 2 of all of the samples that you tested? The 5A and 5B?
No, sir. The sample, I believe it was number 3, which was the 40-minute solid phase micro extraction fiber from the trunk of the car, also contained those components. And the 2 solid phase micro extraction fibers from 7.5 hours, which you referenced in your question, also contained those compounds.
The 3 compounds we talked about a while ago?
Yes.
All right. And if I understood you correctly, you don't know the source from inside of any of those 3?
That is correct.
The final word is the main thing that was there was gasoline.
The predominant chromatographic profile was associated with or identified as gasoline.
And this is a report that you provided to the Sheriff's Department 3 years ago.
Yes, sir. I believe on July 30th.
Thank you very much for your help, sir. I have no further questions.
Ray Cross.
Based on the circumstances of where you examined the car, that it was in a garage, that the trunk liner and spare tire cover had been removed, did it surprise you at all to find elements of gasoline in the air sample?
I would say that I was not surprised to find that, no.
Now, no further questions. Thank you.
May the doctor be excused. Thank you, doctor. You may be excused, Dr. Sigmund.
Thank you.
My name is Susan Mears, SUSAN-MEARS.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Mears.
Good morning.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury again where it is you're employed and what?
I am employed by the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and I'm the crime scene supervisor.
Okay. Now, I'd like to show you items, photographs, defense CN, CM, and CL. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Do you recognize those items?
Yes, sir, I took them.
And are those items that you collected off of Suburban Drive?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you describe what they are?
One of them is a red World of Disney plastic bag, and contained inside of that bag was a cool blue flavored Gatorade bottle.
And is this a bright red bag?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do those photos accurately depict the items that you collected off of Suburban Drive?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, we would move those 3 photographs into evidence.
They will be received in evidence as defense number.
CM will become defense exhibit number 30, CN will become defense exhibit number 31, and CL will become defense exhibit number 32.
May I retrieve the items from the witness, Your Honor?
Yep, you may.
And may I publish these to the jury?
You may.
While we're setting this up, Ms. Mears, can you tell me how far these items were from the skull?
May I refer to my report?
Yes. While she's doing that, may I publish these photographs, Your Honor, to the jury? Can everyone see that? Do you have our answer?
Yes, they were approximately 7 inches away.
7 inches away.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the Gatorade bottle was inside of the bag, correct?
Yes, sir.
Has everyone been able to see? All three? Okay. Okay, I have no further questions for this witness.
Cross-examination?